Hello, Tiki Gray here, and I'm gonna go over this World War One Generals tier list because I saw a video where this other guy did this, and he went over the same tier list. So first, I'm gonna make this tier list myself. Then I'm gonna go to his video and react to his tier list. Now, I don't recognize all these people, so I'm gonna probably get to inspect element out at some point, but let's get started. Okay, I don't recognize. Yeah, I recognize very few of these people actually. Like, I think I know who some of these guys are. Like, this one's obviously Nicholas too. And then I actually don't know where Hindenburg is. I think it's one of these two guys. Damn. Okay, let me get the inspect. Oh, this is Mackinson. Mackinson is very recognizable, especially because of that Totenkopf picture, however you say that hat. So get started. I think this is Ludendorff. Yeah, Ludendorff. Okay. Ludendorff gets. I really want to put him in D tier, but I'll put him in C tier. Because Ludendorff was a very, very flawed general. Because he did not win Tannenberg. My only history video on his channel goes over Tannenberg. Tannenberg was run by a variety of people. Notably, Hermann von Francois and August von Mackensen. You can also give credit to the chief of staff or assistant chief of staff. What was his name? Hoffman. Yeah, Max Hoffman. I think it was his title's like deputy chief of staff, something like that. But those three, well, arguably the two corps commanders on each flank, Hermann von Francois, who was on the left flank, or I guess the right flank, and August von Max was on the other flank. They completed encirclement and pretty much destroyed the Soviet. Oh God, I'm stupid. The Russian Second Army at Tannenberg. Sorry, trying to focus here. And they also disobeyed several orders from Ludendorff. And this actually happens at other times in the war, where Ludendorff gives these orders and then just not good orders. Like in the follow-up battle at the first battle in Masurian Lakes, I believe that was what it called, wherever they pushed Rennenkampf out of Prussia, or almost entirely out of Prussia, Ludendorff gave another order. Hermann von Francois obeyed it, but if he had disobeyed it and gone with a different direction, he would have cut off much more of Rennenkampf's forces. Then the Sprang offensives were horribly, horribly conducted and made zero sense, or near zero sense at an operational level. I want to make a bunch of videos on the Sprang offensives actually, since I really like reading about it. And I can't remember how the quote goes, but there's this thing where Ludendorff is talking to some generals or some chiefs of staffs, and I think it might have been Ruprecht, the Bavarian prince, but whoever it was at some meeting, and he said, "We don't need to make objectives. We're just gonna make a hole and go through. That's what we did in Russia." Except they weren't fighting Russians, and they didn't military defeat Russia. Russia collapsed from internal revolution, even though military defeats had helped contribute to that. But Britain and France, like, they weren't gonna go down so easy. So it wasn't gonna just work from that, just from a strategical standpoint. This wasn't gonna work. Although Germany didn't really have any strategic options at that point anyway. But operationally, like, and he didn't really set objectives or to have a concrete idea of what to do. But for his pros, he did have a good enough understanding of tactics, and he really, when he and Hindenburg took over from Falkenhayn, the OHL, the German Supreme Army headquarters, he introduced a lot of tactical revisions. First, he basically made the army adopt defense in depth, elastic defense. You know, first line was a bunch of outposts, as pillboxes, some machine guns. Second line was the more serious line of defense. And since the enemy would attack, they would overextend from the artillery, where the artillery couldn't reach, or they wouldn't be able to effectively communicate with artillery. Then the Germans would counterattack and just, force back the disorganized, exhausted Allied forces. Then, of course, in the Sprang offensive, they also really overhauled their attacking tactics with Stormtroop and the way the artillery worked, and pretty much just overhauled the tactics of their army completely, from artillery, aircraft, infantry, what they did, how they interacted with each other. So that was good, and that's the only reason I'm putting them in C tier, even though I do want to put them in D tier. Now, I think that's Hindenburg. Let's check. Yep, I hate. Okay, Hindenburg's gonna get. I'm gonna put him in F tier since I'm really looking at like the generalship, not politics or anything. And so I got this wonderful book, The Generals War by David T. Sebecki, which goes over 1918 and covers the 6 primary generals. I was like, finally, I'll get to see what Hindenburg did, since I haven't really read a lot about Hindenburg, and he doesn't really seem like he did anything. And it turns out Hindenburg did nothing, and it was all Ludendorff doing all the work, pretty much. So that's why I'm putting him in F tier. Plus, Hindenburg was also, he supported the whole stab in the back myth. He didn't have any honor or anything. Like, he wasn't a straight up Nazi like Ludendorff, even though that is not affecting my ranking of him. Well, I guess that kind of is, this lack of honor, too. Well, that's more of a side note for me disliking him. Like, he really did not do a whole lot of generalship. So, either F or D tier, I don't know. This is Haig, I think. Let me... Oh, okay, it's von Lettow-Vorbeck. I have a book on African Front, but I have not read it, so I'm just going to leave him down here. Since I do not know a whole lot about von Lettow-Vorbeck, however you say it, even though I do know he did do a good job. I don't know if this guy, I don't know who this person is. Enver Pasha, I have not read anything specifically on the Ottomans, so I'm gonna not go over him. Falkenhayn, okay. Falkenhayn's a really interesting general. Well, maybe not really interesting, but he is interesting. Because he basically took over after Moltke the Younger had his collapse, or basically had a nervous breakdown. Falkenhayn took over. And, well, Germany had no strategic backup plan after the Moltke plan failed, so Falkenhayn was in a really tough spot. Then he also had to deal with this brutal infighting with the Hindenburg-Ludendorff duo. So Falkenhayn went ahead and did Verdun, which was also really oddly executed. He did do good things, and he did do a good job with handling like the operational and tactical problems he had in his search for a strategic solution, like the Battle of, I think it said Gorlice Tarnow. I guess what's called, but in 1950, and it pretty much actually destroyed the Russian army. Like there was a ridiculous amount of casualties. Like I think it was over 1 million. So that pretty much knocked Russia out of war for the next year. So, and he did that so he could switch back to the Russian front, since he wanted to end the war by defeating France, or potentially, I can't remember if he wanted, since Ludendorff in his spring offensives wanted to knock out the BEF, the British Expeditionary Force. That was his primary goal. Falkenhayn, he did end up focusing on France. I'm not sure if he initially considered going after the BEF at all, but he went for France at Verdun. A lot of issues at Verdun. Like, he didn't clearly explain what he wanted to do, because he said, also, there's very little primary sources before the battle on what Falkenhayn was planning on doing, or what his intentions were, because in hindsight's 2020, and he said that was an attritional battle, which, I mean, yeah, I guess it probably was, even though I've seen other people say otherwise. But my main point was he didn't communicate with the Crown Prince. I don't remember what his name was, but the Crown Prince who was in charge of the army there. Although he did give him a competent chief of staff. At least I think the chief of staff is competent. I'm not sure on the details. Since I can't remember what happened to the first one. At least I think there was 2 of them. I know some chief of staff got fired eventually or something. Or the guy wanted to keep attacking, and that just wasn't viable when Ludendorff and Hindenburg took over. But anyway, so the Crown Prince set some objectives for actually taking over Verdun, which that's not good, because you're supposed to be a treating enemy, not getting locked into a vicious, like, grinding battle where you take equal casualties. The other problem was, tactically speaking, since there's a high ground around Verdun, and there are like 2 sides of the river there. I think it was the Meuse, I don't know how to say it. But Falkenhayn, like they should have attacked across both banks, but Falkenhayn did not want to release the admittedly limited German reserves to be able to do that. So the Crown Prince had to only attack across one of the banks, and surprise, surprise, soon they were under enfilade or flanking fire from the other bank. They should have conquered or attacked both banks at first anyway. But yeah, Verdun just kind of wasn't working out for Germany, and Falkenhayn was already unpopular with a lot of people, so the Kaiser eventually dismissed him. He did perform well in Romania, though. I'm gonna put him in B tier. Actually, I almost want to put Ludendorff down. God, I really want to put him in D tier. I had the only two names on this list that I did not recognize were two Belgians. So I'm just gonna ignore those guys. Oh, Conrad. God, okay, this guy's up here. A single redeeming characteristic. This man basically did his best to destroy the Austrian-Hungarian army. He like speed ran destroying the Austrian-Hungarian army because he basically attacked in Russia at World War One, even though there weren't really any meaningful objectives within reach. Like there were this, like he wasn't going to conquer anything. Like, oh, he took over part of Poland. It's like that doesn't matter. So in August he had some initial success, but then the Russians just had a ton of troops, and the Austrians were extremely incompetent tactically too, because Conrad said the only way you fight a war is to attack, from strategic, operational, down to tactical. Like, it's just all about attacking. You're defending, counterattacking, gain the initiative. Yeah, that doesn't always work, and a bunch of Austrian Hungarians died. Then he also tried to go after Italy, and that was also a pretty big failure whenever he did it. So, like, the Austrian Hungarians in general weren't doing much about German hope, so. Okay, who else is on here? Who's this? Pershing. Pershing is, I guess I'll put him in C tier. Like, he had an extreme amount of willpower, but he was overly confident in American abilities and in what a trained marksman can do, what a good old doughboy, with accurate rifle fire could do. And he really didn't like the French and British insistence on trench warfare. He's like, oh, we're just going to break through the open. We're going to show Europeans how it's done. And, well, the St. Mihiel, or St. Mihiel, however you say it, that attack happened, but the Germans were planning on retreating from the salient anyway, and also this was late 1918, so like the German army was already falling, well, not falling apart, I guess, by that point, but it was like, at the end of the rope. It was not, in its prime fighting shape. Then the Meuse-Argonne happened, which was the super slow grind fest, which, on one hand, Germans really needed to hold it since it was a critical position for holding the entire front, actually, because of the logistics, railroads and all that. But again, this was like super late 1918. The German army was like had horrible discipline and morale was already falling apart anyway, so. And he was not popular. It's likely that if the war lasted longer, there's a good chance he would have gotten dismissed if the war went to 1918. What the hell is this? Vaughn. Oh, Moltke. Okay. It was this guy, right? Moltke. I'm gonna put him in C tier. Yeah, I'm not sure how to rank the generals in the tiers. In the tiers itself, it's just kind of random, I guess. I'm not gonna rank in the tiers itself, so that's whatever. Okay, so Moltke. Moltke gets a lot of the blame for the Moltke plan failing, which was a modified version of the Schlieffen plan. But okay, so this happened in World War One and World War Two. The Germans had a really great habit of blaming individuals in their decision and leaderships instead of taking a critical look at their own operational doctrine and planning and their own strategic planning. And they said it was the individual's fault as opposed to like their planning being bad, like the Moltke plan kind of being hard to work since you're in a two-front war. Like, again, World War One is just a disaster from the beginning because, first of all, Germany should not have diplomatically isolated themselves so that they would be in a two-front war before war started. And then they did not have a whole lot of ways. Well, the Chief of Staff Schlieffen made the Schlieffen plan, which was a massive knockout blow through France, but that was more of an idea than a concrete operational plan. And it basically relied on having a lot more divisions than the German army actually had when World War One started, and B, it required on a frictionless work environment. There's not going to be any trouble with communication or delivering orders, or there's not going to be any friction between commanders or individuals involved, which, well, you can't avoid that. There's going to be friction in combat, and there was already a super hard task in the Moltke plan, and it failed. Now, Moltke, how much blame does he get for this? It's questionable, because, again, the German operational doctrine, even the tactics, they really called for like taking an initiative and like local commanders deciding what to do, because at that, the technology wasn't advanced enough for like, if you're one man, you can't command like 70 divisions or whatever, however many it was. Like, it's just too much for one man with the technology at the time. So he relied on the decisions of the army commanders, which is what German doctrine called for. Now, there were other mistakes. I mean, he did not do the best. And he did have a nervous breakdown, but he gets too much of the blame. So, I'm going to put him in C tier. Not the best, but not the worst, like he's sometimes stated to be. Ferdinand Foch. God, this guy's something else. I'm going to put him in A tier. Okay, maybe B tier. I don't know. I'm kind of split on this one, because it's 1918 and he still advocated like pre-war tactics. Put everyone in the front trench, which is really stupid because they all get destroyed or at least crippled or neutralized by artillery. And then you just break through and start running for everything else. Well, you couldn't really break through in World War One due to like logistical issues, but the point is you still took a ton of casualties if you put everyone in the front trench, which is no bueno. But he had a really good operational sense, and he did perform decently well throughout the war. And in 1918, he did a really good job of looking at the German railroads and railroad junction stations and all that, and working to basically defeat the Germans off that during the Allied counteroffensives. Compared to Ludendorff, who didn't really look at the Allied logistical weaknesses in the spring offensives, notably Amiens, and I think the other ones were like Hazebrook, I don't know how to say it, but like something like 80 or almost all the VEF traffic ran through those two like rail stations, and like those weren't objectives at first, which was really, I mean, that's pretty key. Like, that was probably the one way to have the spring offensives works, which was capture those rail junctions, and Ludendorff did not realize that. Like, he did set Amiens as an objective during the first offensive, Operation Michael, but that was not at the beginning. That was well into the offensive, and that was way too belated attempt to assign it as an objective to get anything done. Unlike Ferdinand Foch, who had a really solid grasp on the operational level, even if his tactics were a bit questionable. Okay, Pétain. I'll go ahead and put him in A tier, because he really did what the French army needed, especially after Robert Nivelle kind of destroyed the French army's morale through the failed Nivelle offensive. Pétain realized like doing getting what France needs to do with limited attacks with like the least amount of casualties, winning through firepower and limited skill attacks instead of these grandiose attacks that just where everything just became disorganized. The troops overextended, ran out of artillery range, couldn't communicate, etc. All the problems associated with breakthrough in World War One. Pétain realized the French army needed to do much more limited attacks while limiting casualties to preserve morale. Was it just overall solid leader? Kitchener's not a general, I don't think. Talent? Did he ever? I don't think he held any general roles. As Secretary of State, then he died. Yeah, okay, we're gonna ignore him then. God, who the fuck is this? I don't know. Again, I have not read the Ottomans. Belgian, I don't care. Lawrence is good, but again, I haven't read anything specifically on him. I think I do have a book on him actually. I have 2 books. I have The Fall of the Ottomans, and I swear I thought I had something else on him. Maybe not though. Okay, I haven't read it though, so. Oh, Mackinson. I'll put Mackinson in A tier, I guess. Again, like, we're looking at lots of different generals and like chiefs and staffs and stuff. It's like, it's kind of hard to compare since it's like, if you have like a operational level commander do well with operational, like, because if we're judging German generals for like their operational and strategic ability, like, well, you're not going to get out a strategic conundrum of Germany in World War One, no matter who you are. Like, if you looked at Ludendorff from a purely operational level, he's still garbage there, but it's still different. Or it's like comparing Falkenhayn's operational level to so basically his invasion of Romania or his role in the conquest of Romania against Mackenson's operational level. Mackenson playing a good role in Tannenberg, follow-up battles on the Eastern Front, and also the conquest of Romania. But if you compare, like, wow, Falkenhayn, this is like failed strategically, but like there's not really a way for him to succeed strategically. So it feels kind of weird to try to judge some of these generals that way, since they just have different ways. It's like almost like apples to oranges, but whatever. Operationally, Mackenson's really good though, so we'll just put him in A tier. Oh yeah, he's also at Gorley's Tar now, obviously. That was a really big one. Or I think he, 99% sure he was. Yeah, he was, okay. Luigi. Yeah, this guy was garbage. Holy shit. What, like 11 battles of Izanzo. Like, some people debate how many battles of Izanzos there were, since they kind of bleed into each other sometimes. But I think it's either like 9 or 11 is what's generally said. And yeah, he basically kind of destroyed the Italian army. Then Caporetto happened, where like the Italian army lost like a ridiculous amount of its artillery and equipment, and lost so many men. Like, so many of them just straight up surrendered. So yeah, then he got sacked in that role. Thank God. Also, like, he was just really unaware too. Like, he said a lot. Since I'm getting this from The White War by Mark Thompson, which covers the Italian front. But he said a lot of times that he was like, "Oh, and not even Napoleon could have won here." It's like, yeah, no, dude, you're just a horrible general. This isn't. World War One was hard, but Luigi was super stupid. Did not have a good commanding style. Joffrey, I think it's man, I'm kind of conflicted on Joffrey. Like, he was a very hard-working general and pretty charismatic too. But after the Marne, like, all he had was like failed offensives. And then obviously by Verdun, his prestige had just ran out and he got sacked, replaced by Novelle. So, okay, I'm gonna put Ludendorff in D tier. Was that Ludendorff? That was Ludendorff, right? Like, Ludendorff does not deserve to be in the same tier as Joffrey, in my opinion. Maybe I'm just hating Ludendorff too much, but okay. Well, who is this? I think this is a Belgian. This is also a Belgian, I think. Oh my god, it's not telling me. This is Nicholas II, who, while nominally the head of the Russian military, or of Stavka and all that, after Grand Duke Nikolai stopped doing that. I mean, Nicholas didn't really do any leading and generally. Just a weak character who was uninterested. Okay, Novelle. I mean, if I recall correctly, I think he did decently enough at the tactical level, because obviously he managed to be promoted to like the head of the French army, so he must have done well before. But then there was the Novelle offensive, which was like, the dude just wasn't really cut out for the job, because then the Germans like retreated, and Novelle, well, the Allies weren't expecting that, but Novelle still insisted on going ahead with the offensive despite a significantly changed situation, and the defensive failed horribly. So, yep, we're just gonna put him in. D tier. Partial. Okay. Lawrence. Haig. Okay. Haig's a really interesting character. Does Falcon really deserve to be this high, actually? I'm in C tier. Move over here. Maybe I should move Joffrey to B tier. Oh, that was Mork. That was Persian. No, I don't think I'll keep it like that. Okay, let's get to talking about Haig. I don't know about I'm the king drop you down. Okay. So the thing about Haig is he had a good reputation post-war at first, then Lloyd George kind of destroyed him. That kind of ruined his reputation for the next many decades. People started really looking at him in a new light again in the last couple of decades, and he's gotten a much better opinion. But I just don't think he wasn't that good still. Because it was very optimistic. Like the Psalm. Okay, so yeah, the Psalm. Haig was like, okay, we're gonna make this a breakthrough off. Okay, no, here's what happened. What's the Psalm? Let's make this happen. We're gonna attack the Germans. Rawlinson, the British commander of the 4th Army. Okay, I'm gonna do a bunch of limited attacks since breakthroughs haven't been working, and I don't think they're gonna work. He was like, nah, we're gonna do a breakthrough. Well, surprise, surprise, the Somme did not break through, and it was a very bloody battle. And in retrospect, very much with the benefit of hindsight, Haig said that it was an attritional battle. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the Ally could afford the casualties more in Germany, so it did accelerate or did contribute to Germany's defeat ultimately. Passchendaele, pretty much the same thing. 1918, okay. So 1918, the VEF did well during the Allied counteroffensives, and they fought against the Germans soon enough. Since actually by 1918, I'm not sure when, but the British did start implementing German defense in depth or elastic. Well, not really elastic defense, I guess, but defense in depth, even though they didn't execute it very well, which is part of the reason Operation Michael was so impressive tactically, because the BEF did not execute the defense in depth well due to a variety of reasons. And after that, well, it's all. I'm not sure if he gets credit for that, since this is the big problem with Haig, because a lot of the accomplishments of the BEF come from the lower level. A lot of the accomplishments and improvements of the BEF throughout the war come from the innovations and thinking of lower level generals like Rawlinson, the Dominion commanders. A lot of the success of the BEF is because of them, not because of Haig. Haig was kind of clueless almost on some aspects of tactics and improving the BEF and its capabilities. Of course, he did use tanks and stuff. He wasn't completely clueless, but he did a lot of the BEF success comes from people that weren't Haig. Is my point. The other lower level generals. So why wasn't Haig replaced? A lot of problems because Haig had some good again, Lloyd George absolutely hated Haig. But there are some problems. Hey, you can't replace the head of the army, or at least the head of the Russian front for the British, arguably the most important military role. You can't replace them because that looks bad. Because when you find out your greatest commander is being sacked for incompetence, that's not good for morale, or how the country looks, or the army looks. That's one reason. Another reason, Haig had strong allies. Probably most notably Sir William Robertson. Robertson, whatever. Robertson was his name. That was a good ally for Haig, and Robertson eventually did take the fall. I don't know the details, but he got demoted from whatever he was. I think it was some sort of head chief of staff, and he communicated with Lord George and the civilian government a lot. He eventually took the fall. But another reason Haig didn't get replaced was because there was a limited other options. Because again, there are a lot of successful commanders, but a lot of those commanders were the Dominion commanders. You cannot put an Australian in charge of the British Expeditionary Force because of political reasons. Like, this is not viable. So yeah, we're gonna put Hagen B3. Lance Arabia, he did good, but I've not read about him, so I'm gonna refrain from putting him somewhere. Belgian. Enver Pasha. Oh. That's the inspect elements not telling me who that was. Von Leto. Kitchener. Nicholas. The URL is not telling me who the general was, unfortunately, so I guess that'll be it for this list. And now I am also going to go react to the Wolf. What's his name? I don't know. There's this guy, some Order 1 guy who made a tier list of these generals and made a video. So I'm going to react to that video next. Okay, let's look at this tier list he made and react to it. Oh wait, let me fix my audio. Okay, let's see if it works now.
Differently. The other day, I made a tier list of World War I generals and streamed it live on Twitch. Go ahead and follow me if you want. The link is in the description, or you could just type it in Wolf of 1918. I ranked them based on the premise of who was the best general. And who the best general is depends on a couple of factors. Mainly how they were able to understand the social and economic factors that plagued their nation, as well as the factors of military leadership and how to properly and tactically defeat the enemy. This was also based upon how they were able to learn from the war and adjust properly, as well as several other factors when it comes to military leadership.
I guess maybe we should listen to it.
Now, in the description below are all of the generals that I ranked in no discernible order. Feel free to.
So this is his tier list. He can do whatever he wants, but he also ranks the generals because of like their politics or political affiliations after Order 1 and other aspects of like just their character, which is
arguments or disagreements or any sort of controversy.
It's kind of hard to really relate. Like I was kind of talking about this on my own tier list, just from a purely military sense. I have trouble comparing different generals. But like when you're also comparing like their politics and affiliations, like their military accomplishments and their character, that's like really apples and oranges in my opinion. Like that's kind of hard comparison to make.
There are a couple people in here who didn't really get a chance to fight much, but I will still be ranking them based off of their limited experiences. However unfair that might seem, I wanted to throw them in there because there are some very interesting figures throughout the war who I feel like don't get enough attention put to them because they're overshadowed by much bigger figures, specifically those of the German generals, the French generals.
Oh wait, I forgot to put Brusilov in my list. That must have been one of them. Brusilov is A tier.
We have Hindenburg.
Well, I really want to put him in A tier.
Hindenburg is an interesting person.
I don't know. Okay. Then we go with Brusilov. Okay, I want to put Brusilov in A tier. I really, really do, since he's obviously the best Russian general and he's great. And there's probably like 5 Russian generals who aren't like literally just 5 out of like the 100 or so that weren't completely brain dead. Or maybe even thousands, depending on how low you go with officers. There's so many stupid ones. Problem is, he only fought Austria-Hungary. Like, he never fought the Germans. Like, if he fought the Germans, he would have failed, undoubtedly. But that was more just Russia's fault in general. Their backwards tactics and everything. But maybe not, then again. Also, people say the Brusilov offensive was really bloody. It wasn't bloody because of Brusilov's tactics. Brusilov's tactics, you know, he like, basically primitive or proto like infiltration tactics, lots of grenades, getting as close as possible, swarming trenches, short bombardments, all that stuff you would see later in the war, like in 1918. Now, the reason Brusilov offensive was so bloody was because, you know, it worked at first, obviously. So the Russians were like, holy shit, we need to reinforce Brusilov. So they started sending him a bunch of untrained troops. Since it takes time to train troops, like they couldn't train the reinforcing troops, and those reinforcing troops just got slaughtered because they weren't trained. So yeah, and also just that problems of trying to sustain a breakthrough in World War I.
Who I feel like don't get enough attention put to them because they're overshadowed by much bigger figures, specifically those of the German generals, the French generals, the British generals, and the one American general in the war. First off, we have Hindenburg. Hindenburg is an interesting person. He wasn't really too active in the military aspects of the German war effort. He did do some military commanding, but most of it was Ludendorff below him. And his whole thing was to be that persona, the face of the German military in the East.
Yeah,
and
pretty much.
The face of the German military industrial complex. So he was someone who was able to add to what Ludendorff didn't have, which was charisma and this ability to look like this grandfather figure. He was very much to Germany what Joseph Joffre was to France. And while he didn't really have a lot of experience, while he doesn't have a lot of very big of a track record for military.
I mean, Joffrey actually, made plans and led battles and all that. But yeah.
Leadership during the First World War, even though Tannenberg is greatly attributed to him, it was really the design of someone else. I forget their name.
Hermann von Francois, August von Mackensen, Max Hoffman, and all the other people. Tannenberg and Ludendorff are not responsible for the victory of Tannenberg.
Name at the moment, but they're really only mentioned when talking about Tannenberg. It was really their, creation. Hindenburg just gets the credit because of just timing. I would rate him, just because we are rating these guys as generals, Hindenburg isn't tested enough to know for sure if he was a good general or if he was simply someone who just happened to be riding on the coattails of Ludendorff and other people.
I mean, if he was a good general, I think he would have, took a part in the leading instead of just letting his skills go to waste. Like, it's your number one, and you need to win the war. Like, you're not just going to stand by and do nothing. So
I can't properly rate him with confidence that I'm going to be right in that my opinion is correct to how his abilities were. But I feel like his post-war record in terms of how he handled the state lands mixed with his lack of much doing in terms of during the war, lands him a solid spot at C. He wasn't great, he wasn't bad, he just existed. His complacency with Hitler sort of lowers him down because he kind of bought into it.
I mean, I disagree with his placement, but I more or less agree with everything he's saying. Just that we did our tier list on different qualifications.
Hitler's facade. Next up, we have Pershing. Now, Pershing did have quite a bit of experience, and he was someone who we do have a track record for. He did butt heads with the French and the British a little bit, but overall he was able to find success in areas where other generals before him did not. And you can attribute this to multiple factors. He came in late to the war. Germany's manpower was drained because of the Spanish flu, because of problems with manpower, because of revolution back home, because of lack of ammunition. Supply lines were completely shattered, and they were already on the retreat. But Pershing didn't screw that up, so he's at least a decent general. He was a good dude, from what I've read. He wasn't someone who was, a Nazi sympathizer like quite a few people on this list were, or anti-Semite like quite a few people on this list were. So while I don't want to add personal values to how we rate someone as a general, it does interfere, and I'm going to be open and honest about that. But Pershing, I would say, gets a B rating simply because he didn't manage to screw that up.
I mean, if we're being real, probably every single person on this list was an anti-Semite, even if some weren't so open about it.
He understood the total ability, and there's actual evidence to his military capability. That's why I rate him above Hindenburg. Hindenburg doesn't necessarily have that track record that we can attribute to him because he didn't really do anything militarily. He was more or less a statesman. And his military track record is very much so gray at best in terms of whether or not we can actually attribute anything to him or if it was Hindenburg or some other general. So he gets a solid C. Up next on my list, we have Ludendorff. Now, Ludendorff was one of the people that I can attribute to having the most awareness as to how the war was going, what Germany needed to do to win, and
Well, he knew Germany was losing, but so did everybody else.
And what Germany's ability was to do
Well, everyone else in Germany.
those things. What the home front looked like, what the military situation looked like, and how to manage the Eastern Front and how to sort of manage the war. He was wrong on a couple things, such as the East First policy. However, I doubt that they would have been able to win the war if they focused on the West as much as Ludendorff focused on the East. So he does get a grace in that aspect to where...
Okay, this is interesting. Because it's been suggested that Hindenburg and Ludendorff weren't, that they thought the war would be run in the West too, and they weren't wholly convinced on winning the war in the East either. But they kept on pushing it so much because they were in a power struggle with Falkenhayn, and if they got more troops in the East, they can show how amazing they were. Falkenhayn looks bad, and so on and so forth.
I don't think the war could have gone any better for Germany at the point in which he was able to take over and make that final decision as to whether or not focus on the East or focus on the West. When that debate was happening, it was already too late for Germany. Really couldn't have ended any better unless Germany got lucky in some sort of diplomatic maneuvering.
Yeah, like, German war goals were way too extreme by the end of the war. Like, unless they just gave up a lot. Like, they not make Belgium a puppet state or Luxembourg. Probably give up some bits of Alsace-Lorraine. No, but yeah, it's the spring. Like, yeah, it's true. By the time Ludendorff took over, like, they weren't winning. Like, the Russian collapse was more almost a Deus Ex Machina. Like, that just wasn't gonna happen with Britain or France. And let's say, theoretically, somehow they do force the BEF off the continent and defeat France and make them sue for peace during the spring offensives. The people are still starving. There's still a blockade. America's still in the war. Like they're still going to end up in revolution at some point.
But he understood Germany's condition, and he was able to enact policies that lowered the casualty rate of Germans on the Western Front from 75 Germans lost to every 100 British soldiers to about 55 Germans lost to every 100 British soldiers. He was able to enact policies that are still taught in military schools today, even though...
Well, like at the Somme, it was like, I think it was like 400,000 German casualties versus like 400. Well, what does Google say actually? This is a good one. I have a bookshelf next to me, but I don't want to spend 10 minutes trying to find what I was thinking of. Holy shit. What the fuck? What are your citations? Like, most of the books I seem to read seem to give German losses of around 450,000. British, around similar, but then the French also, of course, had 200,000 losses. So I'm kind of interested where, like, I'm not necessarily doubting his citation or what he's saying, but I'm kind of interested in what the context for that statistic is.
Though they might be slightly outdated, such as elastic defense policies, which was basically, don't stuff everybody on the front line. Have a nice defensive, simple front line that people can retreat from, and then you can just shower the enemy in artillery in pre-designated locations with accuracy. He understood how the war was to be.
I mean, that again, when you're attacking that much by that point, well, not necessarily outrun your own artillery. Maybe you have if you've gone far enough, but you also just have so much trouble trying to communicate with your artillery, and you're disorganized, tired, units are split up. The chain of command has issues because, again, units are split up. So then fresh German troops counterattack and just defeat them and force them back.
Be fought. He understood these things. He even understood that he was not very charismatic, and he had Hindenburg take care of that for him. So he was a very, very smart man. He understood how Germany could win the war. He didn't execute it properly, and things didn't line up, and Germany, of course, lost.
Germany needed to do to win the war was back out as quickly as possible, because they weren't winning the war militarily. So, but yeah.
But he understood these aspects of the conflict to a point where Germany had a very good shot at it. He is quoted as saying, at the outbreak of the Spring Offensive, that Germany cannot win the war, but they better hope not to lose it. Which is basically saying that we can't that Germany cannot win this conflict in terms of being able to accomplish what they want to accomplish from a perspective of victory in how people at the home front will see it. But they can't lose it, i.e. they need to save Germany from destruction. His track record after the war...
I mean, yeah, he was helping that he could put Germany in the military good enough situation to get a not awful peaceful Germany, but I mean the Spring Offensive kind of ruined the German army, so maybe not the best idea.
Is terrible at best. He actively worked with Hitler. He is one of the perpetrators of the stab in the back theory, which Hitler bought into, and which is kind of the
Hindenburg
founding cornerstone of the Holocaust. And he completely danced around the ideas of military failure being the reason for Germany's defeat, even though he himself said that was the reason in 1918 when he tried to sue for peace in September of 1918. So he was very wishy-washy and not a great guy. I can't ding him for that in terms of rating him, but it's important to know that he wasn't a good dude. Now, because of his failures in terms of being a little bit hasty with some things specifically relating to the Western Front, and some of his policies being less than good on the Eastern Front, Über Ost comes to mind, I have to rate him a little bit under S. He wasn't perfect. In fact, I don't know if I could rate any general here. No, there's a couple generals here that'll get the S. But yeah, he gets an A simply for the fact that he was able to understand so much so well.
I can't explain how much that hurts me. But like the only two people who get an S are Hermann von Francois and George Bruchmuller. Except that guy was like an artillery colonel, so not really a commander, so to speak. Well, he's kind of like chief of staff, but if you have chiefs of staffs on, if you have chiefs of staffs on here, we can put Bruchmuller on here. Although Hermann von Francois, I just really like him because of how much he like fucked over Ludendorff or showed his superiority to Ludendorff and Tannenberg.
Up next is Kitchener. Now, this photo is terrible.
Kitchener is not a general.
General Haig.
Haig.
So, Haig gets a lot of hate for several reasons, and they can be very understandable reasons indeed. Just think about the things that he is known for, specifically the Somme and Passchendaele, some of the bloodiest battles of the war for...
He gets hate because Lloyd George hated him. And really, like, just threw him under the bus when he wrote his memoirs.
The British.
Memoirs. And Haig, like, died, I think, in the 1920s. Yeah, he died in 1928, so he couldn't defend himself.
So he is, in many people's eyes, known as the Butcher, the Haig the Butcher. But the Somme is one of those things that I can almost excuse from his repertoire. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm probably aware of that. But regardless, he had this thought of the war as this war of attrition, and he understood that Britain and France could lose more men than the Germans could. And he was a firm believer that America would eventually side with the Entente. So he went out and launched offensives to whittle down the German manpower, specifically to make the war winnable.
Okay, so 1915, like late 1915, Chantilly meeting between Britain, France, Russia, I think Italy was there too. Plan was Germany down enough, like it caused 200,000 casualties enough a month, then do simultaneous offensives and just break the Central Powers. So while that is an attritional idea, again, as I said earlier, the Somme was made to be a breakthrough operation, since the earlier attrition was meant to like get the Germans weak enough for the Somme to be a decisive breakthrough and accomplish a lot. But that didn't happen. And Somme did ultimately help the Allies towards victory. Haig saying it was attritional from the beginning is disingenuous.
Now, it's
not something with a benefit very much with the benefit of hindsight.
It's debatable if his attacks actually did much in terms of ending the war sooner, ending the war in their favor, or doing anything other than just killing people. So you can call him what you want, but he had a very good understanding of the war overall, and he was able to give the Germans a run for their money when he needed to. If he was a terrible general, the British would have sacked him, and they kept him in place for a very, very long time. He was effectively what the British needed at the right moment. He was not a great general. He was no Ludendorff in terms.
God, that hurt me so much. Ludendorff was an awful general.
In terms of how he understood things, because Ludendorff was all about casualty prevention. Save as many men as you can for the offensives.
I wanted Pétain was casualty prevention. Ludendorff was just the most effective tactics, which, while lesser casualties. Well, I guess his defensives. Well, yeah, he was the most effective casualties for take less losses. I mean, I guess with defending, he was trying to save manpower for a counterattack at some point, but then he just threw away all that manpower anyway in the spring offensive. So
Haig, well, not even just save as many men for the offensives, just save as many men as possible. That was Ludendorff's policy. Haig's was just kill the other people at no matter what cost to us, because we have more men to lose. So simply for that aspect, he gets a B. He's not I don't think he was a terrible dude. He understood the.
Also, again, he didn't get replaced because, like, again, Lloyd George hated him, but that doesn't mean the entire government hated him. It's hard to replace someone in Haig's position, but there's also just a lack of suitable alternatives, and Haig had his own allies.
The aspects of the war, and he understood he might have slightly misunderstood them, but he had a good enough grasp that puts him better than most of the generals during the war. Now on to Pétain. So Pétain, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and I'm pretty sure if there's any French people watching, they're going to rip into me for pronouncing it wrong. But he was the French Ludendorff. I think that's the best way to describe him.
I'm not going to say this with 100% authority, but I'm just going to disagree on that one. I mean, you can compare them, but I don't think you can compare them that much. Like, sure, they both had good tactics. That's where the comparisons end, in my opinion.
He understood the war well. He understood the French situation very well. Unlike Ludendorff, he had charisma. And he was almost like a Napoleon without the little man syndrome. He was a very good general and kind of the savior of the French army during Verdun. He was effectively the reason why the French didn't completely collapse during Verdun, and one of the main reasons why the French stayed in the war, and he was one of the leading reasons why the mutinies were able to get stopped. He understood the French military condition, even if he didn't have the power to fix it. So for that, I give him an A. His military track record, like some of the people on this list, isn't very strong to put him there, but his understanding of the personnel and of how to fight the war, and the fact that he was able to properly execute that, puts him at an A.
I mean, commanding in large part is just putting the right people where they do, or is putting people where they will do the best job.
The only reason why he is an S tier, much like Ludendorff, is his compliance with the Nazis later on. Next up, we have Enver Pasha. This was a he was.
I'm just gonna skip this one since I didn't have anything to say on Enver Pasha.
So he gets an F. He just wasn't a great dude. He thought really highly of himself, and any German officer who worked with him had nothing but bad things to say. There's not much else to say than that. He was a butcher. He was what people might accuse Haig of being, but he actually was those things. Now we have Ferdinand Foch. Much like Pétain, he understood the war extremely well. He understood the French people, the French military, and what the French needed to do to win. And especially what the French military needed to do simply to stay alive. One thing that he gets quoted often in saying, and what people like to point out about him, is that he also understood the problems with the Treaty of Versailles, specifically the idea that the Treaty of Versailles was merely a temporary armistice rather than a permanent fix on stopping future war. And simply because of that, he is regarded as someone who was very understanding in means of diplomacy and how to properly go about preventing future wars, and how basically these societies work and how diplomacy works, and just how the machine of Europe operates. He was very well aware of how the machine of Europe operated back in the day. He understood that by doing that to Germany, it was much like what Germany did to France, but worse, in that at some point, not necessarily because of the Treaty of Versailles, because of what it did, but because, well, kind of because of what it did, but because of the way that the peace was written, it was too harsh to give the Germans a sense of pride in what they did, and left them with this bitter taste in their mouth that they would want to take revenge at some point, or at least there would be enough people wanting to take revenge. But it wasn't harsh enough to stop Germany from rebuilding, and he understood that. So I
Wait, rebuilding what? German land wasn't exactly like invaded and razed, except for some like rural parts of Eastern Prussia. Like what were they rebuilding exactly? Excuse me.
I'd put him up at A along with Pétain and Ludendorff.
But yeah, no, my tier list was kind of like purely military, so I don't really have any comment on any of the Versailles talk.
He doesn't have as good of a track record as Pétain or Ludendorff in terms of his overall military command, and I put that more onto his inability to really,
I mean, he out-generaled Ludendorff during his spring offensive, so this Ferdinand Foch was the generalissimo of the Allied forces by... Well, first, they weren't really coordinated that well, but spring offensives happened, Allies were like, oh, we need to actually deal with this. So then they made like some Supreme War Council and put Ferdinand Foch at top, and he would coordinate all the Allied forces. Then he just handled the Western Front much better than Ludendorff did.
No, he was a great organizer. In fact, I'd say he's S tier, specifically because of just the way that he was able to handle the overall situation in the war, and the fact that even post, he didn't live long enough to go into the Nazi era, so it's hard to say if he would have collaborated with the Nazis like Pétain. I doubt he would have, due to just his personality, but it is what it is. Now let's go on to, probably going to get some hate for that as well, just because there's some characters that people might, a lot of World War I generals get a lot of hate that they don't deserve. So there's that. Now, Moltke the Younger, i.e. the person who gets blamed for the failure of the Schlieffen Plan. I'm going to say it right now, he was B. He was a pretty good general. There's not a lot of bad generals on this list so far, which is probably surprising a lot of people about that, because of the absolute failure of
Wait a minute. Oh yeah, I missed John French. Okay, John French is like D tier because he did not have the attitude, or maybe even intellect, or the right type of intellectual command.
The Schlieffen Plan, specifically how badly it failed, and in terms of the long-term effects of the overall problems that it had on the German army. But Moltke was stuck with a plan that he couldn't throw out. This is because the German military commanders, specifically those who had slightly more power than him, liked it so much that they didn't want to get rid of it. They thought it was the end-all plan. Moltke wasn't a big fan. He saw the flaws in it, and him and several other people, specifically him and Ludendorff, worked on trying to figure out a way to make it better.
I mean, Yeah, I wouldn't say it's so much as like other high powers wanted to keep the Siphon plan in place. Like the other two main individuals for German decision making regarding what their military strategy will be, they come to mind are Falkenhayn and the Kaiser. And I don't know what Falkenhayn thought of the Siphon plan, but a large part of the reason the Siphon plan stayed there was because they just didn't have any other plans for a two-front war. Like you can't win an extended one, and like you have to win it as fast as possible. And there's so much possible ideas you can come up with for winning that. So like you're kind of stuck with the Siphon or Moltke plan out of necessity, just due to lack of other options. Even though Moltke himself did have doubts about its how successful it would be or whether it would just work.
And Moltke came up with this idea that because they would not have enough men to properly go around the French army and encircle Paris, to rather bypass Paris and make the entire plan to encircle the French army and destroy it, which is what the German army ended up doing. A lot of people will say that, oh,
ended up trying to do. They did not encircle and destroy the French army because okay, this is gonna blow some minds maybe, but if it's Order 1 and like you don't have motorized military formations and your limit of movement is walking speed and you're in enemy territory and your opponent's movement is walking speed, well, you're not gonna magically walk faster than them. You're not gonna encircle them. Like the French fought their flaws. They're not just gonna let themselves get encircled. They're not that stupid. They're not Russians. And even at Tannenberg, they used railroads to get behind the Russians and redeploy rapidly. So, or not get behind the Russians, but to use railroads to rapidly redeploy to the flanks, which you can't do in enemy territory.
The Schlieffen plan failed because they took too tight of a turn. That was the entire plan because the German army didn't have enough manpower to pull off the maneuver Schlieffen had in mind. Schlieffen was aware of that too. In fact, some people might even say that Schlieffen's plan was sort of a pipe dream, and he was aware of it, and he only made it a sort of a if Germany has the manpower to do so. And then other generals took it and ran with it, and Moltke got stuck with the bill.
I mean, yeah, it was more of just an idea than a concrete operational plan.
So he understood that there was a problem with it, and the way that the Germans executed it was about as good as it could have gone with the British getting involved. If the British didn't get involved, the plan would have probably worked to its fullest. But the British got involved, and we ended up having trench warfare for almost 5 years.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Moltke was a B-tier general. He made several key mistakes, and he wasn't able to handle the stress of watching the war devolve into what it was, and he blamed himself for it. So because of those several key problems, and because he just wasn't able to hold himself together or really adapt to the changes in his plan, he gets a B tier. Although he is as high as he is because he understood the flaws in the plan and made adjustments to it that almost worked. Whereas the original plan would have seen the complete destruction of the German army from the onset. Anyway, let's go on to everyone's favorite general of the war. Well, I shouldn't say everyone's favorite general of the war. One of the most infamous generals of the war, if you kind of understand World War I. Oh, I shouldn't even say if you kind of understand it. If you've looked into specifically Italy, so you guys can already kind of see where this is going. Luigi Cadorna. This dude loved the Isonzo River. He was a big fan of it. He decided to have 12-hole battles next to the Isonzo River. He somehow could not understand the fact that, well, you know, if it's not working, go somewhere else, right? He couldn't understand that let me put it this way. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. Luigi Cadorna did just that. He didn't adjust. They didn't change things. He simply sent an entire generation of Italians to go die across the same damn river a dozen times. He does not even deserve a place on this list, but we'll put him at F. Up next, we have the French equivalent.
Yeah, the dude was a complete idiot.
In Nivelle. Nivelle is someone who...
Wait, what did you say about Nivelle?
They didn't change things. He simply sent an entire generation of Italians to go die across the same damn river a dozen times. He does not even deserve a place on this list, but we'll put him at F. Up next, we have the French equivalent in Nivelle.
Nivelle did fail, but I mean, like, he'd only be the equivalent to Cadorna if Nivelle was like leading the French since the beginning and like led all the disastrous French offensives.
Nivelle is someone who was given the credit for Verdun and for the success at Verdun and the French ability to hold it, even though he simply took what Pétain had made and ran with it. So he got all the credit. And when Joseph Joffre got replaced by being promoted into an office where he couldn't do anything, they needed to replace him. And it was between Nivelle, who was very popular amongst the politicians.
Okay, see, that was really funny, actually. Since I just read The Russian Front by Nick Lloyd, which actually got published on March 30th of this year, 2021. Excellent book. Because so when Joffrey first heard about this promotion quotation marks, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm just getting moved to a higher position, just some shuffling around. And he was like, oh wait, I'm getting like removed from power. It just looks good for me. Like, since you can't really fire someone like that high up, he just moved him to somewhere else. Then I believe he resigned actually when he figured it out.
Pétain and Ferdinand Foch. So of course Nivelle wins, specifically because he talks about this grand plan to win the war in 48 hours, and he'll only say it if he gets the position. So they give him the position, and he says, I have this plan, this offensive plan, and the French are immediately like, no, monsieur, we have done that. Bad idea. And he's like, no, but see, it's
very interesting pronunciation of Messiah. I'm pronouncing it bad too, but it's not Monsieur or whatever he said.
It's good because
I'm not trying to be like nitpicky. I just thought it was kind of funny.
Because if it doesn't work within the first 48 hours, I'll call it off. And they just say, well, okay then. That sounds great. And then the Germans, and so his plan heavily relies on mapping the area where the Germans are and pinpointing weak spots and exploiting those weak spots and basically using those to roll up flanks and then exploit a big hole. Basically a more thought-out version of the Battle of the Somme and a more thought-out version of Passchendaele. The problem is literally weeks before they do the offensive, not even that, the Germans retreat to the Hindenburg Line. And so everyone's telling him, look, we can just replan it and we'll do it later. But he is so stubborn that he still goes on with the offensive.
Yes, 100% correct.
And the French army gets destroyed, so badly damaged that the British have to hasten their launching of the offensive of Passchendaele in bad weather simply to relieve the French pressure so that the French army doesn't completely collapse.
I think that's a bit of an overstatement. Like, people bring up a lot, oh, the French were mutined in 1917, the Germans should have attacked. Well, A, you need to it takes a really long time to plan attacks in World War One. And B, Germany didn't really have manpower to smear. Like, they were really good at shifting on what they did have, but like, they did not have the manpower to launch an offensive like that. Yes, it is true. The BEF really did start picking up a lot of the hard work in the warfare in 1917 and 1918.
His terrible offensive, and then the 48 hours go over. This is before the Battle of Passchendaele. The 48 hours end, and they tell him to stop because they haven't gone anywhere. And he says, no, the Germans are just about to break. And they keep throwing men into the meat grinder. And the French government keeps begging him to stop, but he just keeps convincing him to let him go a little bit longer, to where the British have to launch a hasty version of Passchendaele, which ends up being the Battle of Passchendaele in poor weather. and the French army gets so bloodied that they mutiny. And it's only because of Pétain and Ferdinand Foch that the mutinies are able to stop, and it doesn't result in a complete collapse of the French army and a complete collapse of France. So because he literally nearly destroyed the
I'm sure he's pronouncing Pétain and Ferdinand Foch better than me.
Entire French army and the entire nation of France, and sent so many French men to die for nothing, he is literally on the level of Luigi Cordona, if not just a little better. Cordona was only replaced when the Italian army was getting completely destroyed by the Austrians during their offensive. Let's go on to the first Russian general of the list, Brusilov. I'm just going to say it, he's A tier, easily. He understood the the Russian condition on the Eastern Front near perfectly. He understood what the Russians needed to do to secure victory, and he launched an offensive so violent and so successful, it effectively destroyed the Austrian ability to win the war.
Whoa. Okay, no. The Austrians effectively destroyed their ability to win the war in, like, 1914. But yes, Brusilov's offensive did almost knock Austria-Hungary out of the war. I mean, it's kind of an overstatement on my part for the first part, saying that Austria really honestly had destroyed its army by that point.
Crippled the Austrian army. Even though Russia lost the...
I mean, it like crippled it more. It's like the body's already dead. Like, you're sitting in some more.
War, the Entente was more than likely able to secure...
You're like trying to knock Germany over by, like, Germany's holding this corpse of a country in front of itself. You're just trying to bludgeon through the corpse and hit Germany.
Pure victory, because Brusilov completely destroyed the Austrian ability to fight. I'm not saying that's the only reason why they won, but I'm saying that without that happening, I don't think that the Allies would have had an easy time winning the war in 1918.
I mean, like, the Central Powers had victory after victory after victory when you think about it. Mainly against Russians and other minor powers, but, like, military circumstances don't really matter if you're starving. Like, Germany was gonna... I mean, Austria-Hungary... Well, Germany and Austria... all the Central Powers are gonna collapse anyway. Sooner or later, regardless of military circumstances.
I don't think the Germans...
As long as there's still a war going on.
...would have just completely collapsed.
Because you have to remember, for Austria-Hungary, Russia was defeated, Serbia was defeated. All they had to fight was Italy. It is completely, like, collapsed and disintegrated. Like, Austria-Hungary's war is basically almost over by 1918. And they still disintegrated.
I don't think the Austrians would have just completely collapsed. I think it would have gone longer if the Allies even win. So his offensive effectively really helped. It was exactly what Haig wanted his offensives to be. A crippling blow that boosts morale and completely annihilates whole portions of the enemy army. And because of that, he gets A. I'd put him at S, but he wasn't able to continue going forward with that. And I kind of blame that on the Russian Revolution.
I mean, you can't put him at S since he didn't fight the Germans. Like, he didn't. Like, he was fighting the Austrian Hungarians who were already in a terrible condition. So, still a great general, though.
And the Russians' inability to, their morale collapsing.
I mean, he did fight the Germans, since there were Germans on the Austrian-Hungarian portion of the front, but, like, he didn't primarily fight the Germans, is my point.
Because they didn't feel like fighting anymore. But, yeah, that's where I place Brusilov. Now for everybody's favorite British general, John French. Ironically named, because he is a British general, and he hated the French. You can kind of already see where this is going. He was the general of the British forces for, I think, the first year of the war, and he continually disregarded orders to work with the French. He, after the initial pushback by the Germans, demanded that his entire military be evacuated from France, and resisted the orders to go off and help the French plug the gaps on the Marne. He just didn't want to work with the French. He didn't want to have his army die in France.
Oh, yeah, that was really funny, actually, because, you know, Kitchener heard about this. The dude literally hopped on a destroyer, came over to France, had a meeting of Sir John French. I don't know what he said to John French, but all of a sudden, John French was cooperating with the French. So,
like the fact that he had to go command the troops in France and that the troops were getting sent to France. He didn't like the fact Britain was, doing anything in terms of sending troops on the ground. He wanted to fight Germany. He just didn't want to fight Germany in France. John French was militarily, he was pretty good at what he was doing in terms of how he was able to command troops and how they were able to fight. The British were, the British professional army was historically good in terms of their tactical prowess and their ability to fight in the early war. And a lot of that has to do with John French. He was very good at commanding troops. He just didn't understand the war. He didn't understand the strategic position and that he needed to put his pride aside in order to see victory. So because of that, I'm putting him with, I would say, below Hindenburg, because even though he was really good tactically, his strategic prowess, which you need in a general, was so limited that he didn't get it, and it almost cost the Allies the war. So he doesn't believe... he doesn't deserve to be higher than a D. He's not F tier because he didn't waste lives, but he's not any higher than D because he almost lost the war for his nation simply because of his arrogance. And Armadillo, John French, I highly recommend looking into him. He was the original general of the British forces, and he was pretty bad at what he did in terms of the strategic ability, like I was saying. Up next is one of my lesser favorites of the German generals, Erich von Falkenhayn.
Yeah, no, everything he said about French was good. There's nothing I disagree with.
But
not that I'm here to go over the authenticity of his video or something. It's just this guy is getting a master's, or he's educated in history. Well, I just read books. I was gonna get a history degree, but that didn't pan out.
He isn't. So Falkenhayn's an interesting character. This dude was, what's the word I'm looking for? He was a good general, but he had his major faults. I'm going to go ahead and just put him in B tier, just below Ludendorff. Falkenhayn has one major taint on his record, has one major stain, and that's Verdun. And no, not even that. It's literally his policies during 1916. His policy to counterattack anytime the Germans lost ground during the Somme without hesitation caused so many casualties that it was really just a waste of life. When the German army could have just pulled back to other positions and pulled back, taking limited casualties and inflicting heavy casualties against the British because they had land to lose, he instead ordered the Germans to just counterattack at every opportunity. In Verdun, he launched an offensive on forts and continued to send men into the meat grinder when they weren't making any ground. He did learn from his mistakes, and he was extremely successful in Romania when he was allowed to operate in open land. So he was a good general at certain points, and he understood several aspects of what Germany needed to do to win.
See, that's difficult to these comparisons. Are you looking at them from the tactical level, the operational level, the strategic level? If we put Mackensen in Falkenhayn's position, is Mackensen really going to find some magic solution to Germany's strategic dilemma? I mean, I don't think so.
Specifically, that Germany needed to take France out of the war. If France was out of the war, the entire British army on the continent could get surrounded and taken out, and the British, without an army, would more than likely sue for peace. So he understood that aspect. He understood these aspects of the war that really take a really good general to understand and be able to apply. And he was able to do that. But his stains in 1916 put him at a B-tier general. On top of that, he was supposedly, according to people who knew him, he died early on. I think he died in 1920. But supposedly, he was a very good person. He was a very nice person. And he didn't buy into a lot of the stab-in-the-back theories. He did have some time in Palestine, and he actually prevented several mass killings of Jews while he was there. So he was a very, very good person in terms of his personality. From what
Okay, maybe he wasn't an anti-Semite, or maybe he was still in this, but mass killing is a little too far for him.
We know of him, but he wasn't the best general. I put him at B tier simply because of 1916. If he handled 1916 better, I'd probably put him at an A tier. Now on to Joseph Joffre, the person I keep comparing a bunch of the other people to, but nonetheless someone that deserves to be mentioned. Joseph Joffre is effectively given the term Savior of the Somme, even though that was technically another general, so very much like Hindenburg, given credit where it wasn't necessarily him, although he did play a big role in the Miracle on the Marne rather than Hindenburg and Tannenberg. I would put him at a B. He did get promoted up away from commanding the military because he was making some pretty big errors. Like, he was really good in 1914. By 1916, he was making such critical errors in terms of military strategy that it was clear that he hadn't learned the lesson.
Oh yeah, let's remember his plan. I think it was Plan 17, something like that. That was a horrible failure. That was Joffre's, so that's what he went with. Then the Marne happened. He managed to stop the Germans. He got a ton of prestige and credibility. It was just a bunch of failed offensives and him being difficult with civilian politicians. And by 1916, they just had enough of him.
Lessons that he should have learned by that time, but he was still like this figure that understood French society in terms of what he needed to do in order to keep the societal.
But yeah, because 1916, because of Verdun, didn't look good for him, since there are actually there are some lower level commanders at Verdun who Verdun's not heavily defended. This could be a problem. And Joffrey didn't act on that. So, and the civilian politicians knew of that too. So,
aspect intact and the industrial aspect. Militarily, he wasn't learning what he should have been learning. So I can't put him above B for that reason alone. As much as I want to, because he was really good in the opening stages of the war, I just can't. I can't. For anyone who is a Joseph Joffre fan, I apologize I can't put him higher. It's just I can't do it with a good conscience.
Well, let's be real. How much Joseph Joffre fans are there?
Up next, we have Hotzendorf. Yes, Konrad von Hotzendorf.
Hotzendorf. So that's how you pronounce it. I always just say Konrad when I'm talking about him. Hotzendorf. Hell the name.
One of the people who started the First World War, basically dragged Austria into it, had requested Austria go to war with Serbia.
Konrad is very pro-war, but there are a lot of decision makers and individuals.
Like once a month up until the war started. The dude was an idiot. He did.
Yeah, he was very belligerent, but lots of other people. It's not like Konrad himself was like shooting Serbians or something, or trying to do some false flag operation or something, or doing anything particularly dramatic.
He was overzealous in engagement, specifically to try to win over an already married woman. And I'd say he contends with Luigi Cordello for Cadorna.
But no, he's right about that. Since Konrad, he was hoping during the war that military victory will give him enough prestige for him to marry a mistress who was already married to another man. Since, this is early 1900s. You can't do that. Like, it's socially unacceptable. But Konrad was hoping he would get military victory and and people would look past the social acceptability of marrying another married woman.
For one of the dumbest generals of the First World War. In fact, they basically competed against each other on the Italian front for who could be dumber. And so he goes there. This dude was so dumb, he literally made it so okay. You are...
Whoa, let's hold on. I really wish... Yeah, okay, you could have more generals on this list for sure. Everyone knows that, but... I think there was this other Austrian-Hungarian general, and this is a fact I don't know his name. Maybe explains why he's on this list. But he was actually probably the only good or at least not incompetent Austrian-Hungarian general. I think he was Slavic, but maybe not. I can't remember what his name was though. I know he did serve on the Italian front, and he did do like Conrad also played a role on the Italian front. Whenever he played a role, it was awful. But this other guy, he did well when he was on the Italian front. I just can't remember his name.
Fighting the Italians. They've been pushed back, and you know all you need to do is strike one more blow. You no longer have to deal with Serbia. You no longer have to deal with Russia. Who do you send to fight the Italians? Easy. Find the people who are loyal to your country, right? Get a lot of Austrians there. Keep, other people low. No, what Hotzendorf does is he literally takes Italians in the Austrian army and Hungarians who are under unrest and almost no Austrians and launches an offensive with that. Yeah, the entire Austrian...
I mean, I don't know about Austrian reliability, but like the most reliable people or soldiers against the Italians were like Slovenians and other Slavs in that area, since like Italy was blatantly imperialist when they joined the war. Like they wanted Slavic territory.
The Austrian army was completely destroyed because you had everyone who was unhappy with the Austrian army in Austria in general getting sent against the Italians when, the Austrians weren't really engaged. So he effectively lost the war for the Austrians. He started, though. He was one of the main proponents of starting the war. So he gets the F tier. He killed people for no reason. He simply...
Yeah, definitely lost the war. For the Austrians.
People that died.
But let's look at it. It's like the Russian problem. They don't really have any good generals. Like maybe like one or two. Like there's just no good generals.
Die for he killed a generation of Austrians in useless fighting. His actions in Privysville, which is where he gets most of his hate, are more justified. But he never learned, and he continued to make mistakes throughout the war. And he was never sacked because Austria was just that incompetent.
Well, he was sacked. Let me go Wikipedia this to make sure I'm right. Because he was removed from the, like, he still had a military command, but he was removed from the chief of staff. Yeah. Yeah, dismissed Conrad, March 1st, 1917. Yeah, and then next he was placed under the command of the South Tyrolean Army Group against the Italians. Oh, yeah, Borovic. This was the guy who wasn't, like, incompetent. Or, like, one of the only Austrian Hungarians who wasn't incompetent. Although, I might be wrong, actually. I can't recall a whole lot of details, but my general impression was that he was decent enough for Austria-Hungary. Yeah, let's get back to the
video. All right. So we're almost done, and we've only really got one S tier, one C, one D. Mostly B tier generals, which is what I was kind of expecting with this. But now we go on to Mackensen. This dude is easily S tier. Now, he did have the anti-Semitism after the war, but he didn't like Hitler. So, I would say he's... The reason why Ludendorff is A tier is because he made several key mistakes that, throughout the war, specifically his choice of Eastern Front first, that don't put him to S tier. Mackensen was just a very good general in terms of understanding what he needed to do. He wasn't at the higher echelons as Ludendorff was, but he was very, very good at fighting the war and accomplishing what he needed to accomplish for his nation. His anti-Semitism aside, his terrible personality aside, he is an S tier general. Now up for Nicholas II. He is the only leader.
He wasn't general. So we're gonna. Oh shit, my mic's super far away. My bad. He wasn't really the general. I mean, he was technically in charge, but it was nominal. We're gonna skip him. I mean, we could talk about him, but I don't really have any interest in talking about him. Doesn't really fall into the scope of the rest of this video, in my opinion.
Guerrilla warfare is still studied to this day. He was one of the last generals to. I think he was the last Central Power general to surrender.
Oh no! Okay, now I was talking about Von Lettel, or however you call him. And again, I'm not familiar with him since I have not read on the African front, unfortunately. So let's skip him to.
That otherwise would have his actions there, and his ability to fight, and you.
Lawrence, again, not familiar. Are these two other guys the Belgians? I might just end up skipping this.
And because of his, his staunch and stubborn fight against innumerable odds against the Germans, and the fact that he was able to inspire his forces to
Okay. Well, I guess I'll be in this video, so. Good stuff. I actually just joined this guy's Discord server today. Since I came across this video on the Kaiserfelsian subreddit, which is a terrible subreddit, but I do browse it every couple months because sometimes there is some funny stuff on there. I was like, well, I guess I can react to this tier list, since I've actually been wanting to make like a mega tier list, but I'm talking like, 30, 40 generals or something, and I don't know enough about Order 1 to do something like that yet, so yeah, this was fun. I'll go ahead and put his channel and Discord in my description. So that will be the end of this video.